The Johnsons had lived in the quiet, suburban neighborhood of Millbrook for nearly 25 years. They were a typical family, no drama, no scandals, just two children who had grown up and moved away, leaving Tom and his wife, Sylvia, to enjoy the peaceful life of retirees. Or at least that's what Tom thought. It was a warm Thursday evening when Tom walked in to find Sylvia sitting on the couch, staring at a piece of paper with wide, tear-filled eyes. Her hands trembled as she held the results of a recent medical test, and Tom, concerned, quickly walked over to her. "Syl, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. "It's the test," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm pregnant, with twins." Tom's heart dropped. He blinked twice, unsure if he'd heard her right. "Pregnant?" His eyes scanned the paper in her hands. A small part of him, deep inside, wanted to believe it was some kind of mistake. Sylvia was 60 years old. There was no way she could be pregnant, let alone with twins. "That's impossible," he muttered under his breath. Tom had had a vasectomy 15 years ago. It was a decision made after their last child, a son who was now in his early 20s, had been born. The thought of having any more children had never crossed his mind. It had been a simple, straightforward procedure to ensure that wouldn't happen. Sylvia lowered her gaze to the floor, avoiding his eyes. She looked pale and her lips quivered. "I don't know how it happened," she confessed, "but the doctors are sure. I've been keeping something from you, Tom." Tom's mind raced. 1,000 thoughts flooded his brain. Was this some kind of late-life miracle? Or was something far more sinister at play? His gut told him something wasn't right. But what was the truth? Tom reached for his phone, dialing their family doctor, but Sylvia stopped him. "No, Tom, I need to explain everything first," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. Tom's confusion only deepened, but he nodded, asking, "Okay, what's going on, Sylvia?" Sylvia hesitated, then began to speak in a low, shaky voice. "It's not just the pregnancy. It's what happened before it." Tom leaned in closer, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Her eyes filled with tears as she began to unravel a tale of lies, betrayals, and a shocking secret that would ultimately lead to a tragedy no one could have seen coming. Sylvia's hands shook as she clasped them together, trying to steady her breath. Tom could see the strain in her face. This was a woman who had always been composed, someone who rarely showed vulnerability. But now she looked like a broken woman, one carrying a burden far too heavy for her to bear alone. "Tom," Sylvia began, her voice trembling, "there's something I haven't told you all these years. I didn't want to hurt you, but now it seems like the time has come." Tom sat down beside her, his mind still reeling from the initial shock. His hands rubbed his temples in disbelief. "What do you mean? You're talking about the pregnancy, right? Or is there something else?" Sylvia nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the floor as if she couldn't bear to meet his eyes. "It's not just the pregnancy. It's something I did, something I thought was a mistake at the time. And now it's all come back to haunt me." Tom could feel his heart racing. This wasn't just about a surprise pregnancy. There was something deeper, something darker that Sylvia had been hiding from him for years. "Sylvia, please," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just tell me what's going on." Taking a deep breath, Sylvia finally spoke the words that shattered everything Tom thought he knew about their life. "After you had the vasectomy, we thought our family was complete. But Tom, I had an affair, a year after the procedure. I don't know what came over me. I was lonely. You were busy with work, and I met someone. He was younger, charming. We connected in ways I hadn't felt in years." Tom's stomach churned. He wasn't prepared for this. He had always trusted Sylvia, never once questioning her loyalty. And now hearing her words felt like a betrayal that went beyond anything he could have imagined. "I never meant for it to go this far," Sylvia continued, her voice strained with guilt. "But it did. And I ended up pregnant. At first, I didn't know who the father was. The timing was all wrong. My periods were irregular, and the doctors said it was impossible. But when I found out I was carrying twins, I knew. I couldn't explain it to you. I couldn't break your heart like that. So I lied. I told you it was just a mistake with the test, that I was going through early menopause and there were complications. But I knew. I knew the truth all along. Tom sat there motionless, as if the world around him had suddenly stopped. His mind raced, his thoughts like a hurricane. The woman he had loved and trusted, the woman who had been his partner for decades, had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. "Sylvia," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "you had an affair. And now you're pregnant with twins, and I'm supposed to believe this is a miracle? That this is somehow okay?" She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want it to be like this, Tom. I was so ashamed. But when I went to the doctor, they couldn't explain the pregnancy either. I thought you'd never find out. And then, and then I didn't know what to do anymore." Tom's anger simmered beneath the surface, his fists clenched at his sides. But despite the anger, a deep sense of betrayal and confusion gnawed at him. He had never imagined his life would come to this. But before he could say another word, Sylvia added one final chilling detail. "There's more, Tom. The man I had the affair with. He's back in town. And I think he's the reason everything's falling apart." Tom's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Sylvia wiped her tears, her voice low. "I think he's been following me, watching me. I don't know how or why, but something doesn't feel right. I think he's trying to force me to, I don't know, to tell you everything, to ruin our lives." Tom didn't know what to say. His mind couldn't process the enormity of what was happening, the betrayal, the secrets, the new danger that was now lurking just beyond the horizon. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible thought began to take shape. What if this wasn't just about Sylvia's affair? What if it wasn't just a twisted love story? What if someone was trying to get rid of him altogether? The days following Sylvia's confession were a blur of emotions, accusations, and guilt. Tom had been trying to process everything she had told him, but it felt like his world was unraveling. The woman he had spent his life with, the woman he had trusted above all others, had shattered the foundation of their marriage. But now something more pressing had come into focus. The threat Sylvia mentioned. The man she had an affair with. The one who might be watching them. Tom spent sleepless nights pacing their quiet home, trying to figure out how to deal with the situation. The idea of confronting Sylvia's lover filled him with dread. He wasn't a confrontational man by nature, and the thought of going face to face with someone who had violated his trust made his blood boil. But Sylvia's warning kept echoing in his mind. "He's back in town." It was Saturday morning when the first sign of trouble arrived. Tom was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through the newspaper, when the doorbell rang. He glanced at the clock. 10 a.m. Too early for any scheduled visitors. Hesitant but curious, he walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the doorstep was a man in his early 40s, dressed in a black leather jacket and jeans. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his sharp blue eyes seemed to pierce right through Tom. "Can I help you?" Tom asked, his voice cautious. The man smiled, but there was something unsettling about the way he looked at Tom. It was almost as if he was sizing him up, studying him. "Are you Tom Johnson?" the man asked, his voice smooth and calm. "Yes, I am." "Who are you?" Tom replied, trying to mask the unease in his voice. "My name is Robert Carter," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm an old friend of Sylvia's. I just moved back into town after several years, and I wanted to stop by and say hello." Tom felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Robert Carter. The name sounded familiar. Of course it did. This was the man Sylvia had been seeing. The man who had left her pregnant when Tom thought their life together was safe and predictable. Tom hesitated for a moment, not sure how to respond. He didn't want to create a scene, but his mind raced, putting all the pieces together. This was the man Sylvia had warned him about. "Actually, now's not a good time," Tom said firmly. "I think you should leave." Robert's smile didn't falter. "I understand, Tom. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'll come by another time." Before Tom could say anything more, Robert turned and walked down the steps, disappearing around the corner of the house. Tom stood frozen in the doorway, his heart pounding. He watched the man for a few moments, trying to shake the unsettling feeling that had settled over him. Closing the door, Tom leaned against it, trying to collect his thoughts. What had just happened? He had only seen Robert for a few seconds, but he already knew he couldn't trust him. There was something about his demeanor that was off, too calm, too smooth, as if he were trying to manipulate the situation. Tom knew Sylvia's lover wouldn't just slink away into the past. He had returned for something, and Tom feared the worst. With the air in the house growing heavier by the second, Tom's mind began to race. If Robert Carter was back in town, what did he want? Was he simply trying to rekindle an old affair? Or was there a darker motive behind his return? Sylvia's warning echoed in his mind again. I think he's been following me, watching me. But why? Why now? Was Sylvia's affair really the only reason Robert had come back? Or was there something else at play? The mystery deepened, and Tom knew one thing for certain. He couldn't ignore this. Something dangerous was brewing, and he needed to get to the bottom of it before it was too late. Later that afternoon, Tom drove to the local police station. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly, but he needed answers. When he arrived, he spoke with Officer Jenny Callahan, a seasoned investigator who had worked on several high-profile cases over the years. She listened carefully as Tom explained the situation, how Sylvia had confessed to the affair, the surprising pregnancy, and now the unsettling appearance of Robert Carter at their door. That's definitely a red flag, Officer Callahan said thoughtfully, tapping her pen against the desk. Someone who resurfaces after years of being out of contact. It sounds like he has an agenda. And if Sylvia's telling you he's been following her, I'd say you need to take this seriously. Tom nodded, his gut telling him that something far worse was at play. Officer Callahan reassured him that they would look into Robert Carter's background, see if there was any history of violence, or if he'd been involved in any criminal activity. Tom left the police station feeling a small sense of relief, but he knew the real work had only just begun. He was no longer just a man dealing with a painful betrayal. He was now a man on the edge of something much darker, something he couldn't yet fully understand. And as he drove home, one thought dominated his mind. If Robert Carter had come back into their lives for a reason, what would it mean for his family and for his wife? The next few days passed in a haze of tension and uncertainty. Sylvia had retreated into herself, her earlier confessions hanging between them like an insurmountable wall. Tom didn't know how to talk to her, didn't know if he could ever look at her the same way again. The weight of her betrayal was crushing, and the growing suspicion that Robert Carter was involved in something much darker only added to the pressure. But there was something more pressing now. Officer Callahan's words echoed in his head. If Robert Carter is back in town, we need to take him seriously. And so, Tom had no choice but to get involved. He had to uncover the truth for his family's sake, for his own sanity. The investigation began quietly. Officer Callahan had promised to gather information on Robert, but Tom wanted to take matters into his own hands as well. The man who had once been an old flame of Sylvia's might have stayed hidden for years, but now he was in Tom's sights, and Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the appearance of Robert Carter was far from a simple coincidence. A few hours later, Tom found himself sitting at his computer, pulling up the name Robert Carter in the public database. He knew it was a long shot, but he hoped for a clue, something that could help him make sense of all the chaos. His search turned up a few results, but one stood out. Robert Carter, born in 1982, had been involved in a suspicious car accident 7 years ago. It had been a hit-and-run situation, and while the police had never found the driver responsible, Robert's name had come up in relation to the incident. The reports didn't give too many details, but it was clear that Robert had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or so it seemed. Tom's mind raced. What did this have to do with Sylvia? What kind of man was Robert Carter? He clicked further into the search results and found an arrest record. Robert had been arrested for assault in his early 20s, but the case had been dismissed when the victim failed to show up in court. This was the first real indication that Robert might not be the harmless, charming man Sylvia had painted him to be. Tom leaned back in his chair, feeling more uneasy by the minute. This wasn't the type of person you would want to welcome into your home, let alone have a relationship with. But the affair wasn't the only thing bothering Tom now. The mystery of Robert's return and his possible involvement in something dangerous was becoming more urgent by the hour. The following morning, Officer Callahan called Tom with an update. She had done some digging of her own and discovered that Robert Carter had a history of moving from town to town. He had lived in 3 different states over the past decade and had no permanent address, which made it difficult for authorities to track him down. His life seemed to be a string of half-finished businesses and unresolved issues. But what caught her attention the most was his connection to a private company, a small, discreet organization known as Westwood Enterprises. The company had been under investigation by the FBI for several months. According to sources, it was involved in money laundering, human trafficking, and potentially worse. But no one had been able to nail down the full scope of its operations. Robert Carter had been listed as a contact person for the company, but his exact role was unclear. Tom's heart skipped a beat. Human trafficking? Money laundering? "I'm going to need to meet with you," Officer Callahan said, her voice low and serious. "I think it's time we looked into this company and Robert's connections more closely. There's a chance he's involved in something far more dangerous than we initially thought." Tom agreed to meet her later that day. He had always known there was something unsettling about Robert Carter, something more than just a simple affair. But hearing about his involvement in a criminal enterprise made Tom's blood run cold. It didn't make sense. Sylvia had been so adamant that Robert had just come back into town to rekindle an old romance. But now it seemed like there was something darker at play. Tom knew he couldn't wait for the investigation to play out on its own. He needed answers now. He had to protect his family, especially Sylvia, who still seemed so naive about the danger they were in. As Tom prepared to leave for the police station to meet Officer Callahan, his phone buzzed with a new message. He unlocked the screen and found an unknown number. The text was short and to the point. "I know what you're looking for. Meet me tonight at the park by the lake, 8 p.m. Don't bring anyone." A cold sweat broke out across Tom's forehead. Who was this? And why did they know about his search for Robert? Was it someone connected to Robert's criminal activities? Or perhaps it was Robert himself trying to silence Tom before he could learn too much? Tom's mind raced. He wasn't sure if this was a trap or a chance to get closer to the truth, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back down now. That evening, Tom drove to the park near the lake. The sun had long set, and the park was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the rustling of trees in the wind and the distant croaking of frogs. He parked his car in the dimly lit lot, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. As he walked through the park, he glanced around, his senses heightened. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, and every noise felt like an omen. He finally reached the lake, where a figure stood in the darkness, just out of reach of the dim light from the street lamps. "Tom Johnson?" the figure asked, its voice low and gravelly. "Yes," Tom said, his voice steady but his heart racing. "Who are you?" The figure stepped closer, revealing a face he recognized instantly. It was Robert Carter. Tom's gut tightened. "I think you've been asking the wrong questions," Robert said, a smirk tugging at his lips. "But don't worry, I'll set you straight." Tom's pulse quickened as Robert Carter stepped out of the shadows, his presence both chilling and familiar. Tom had expected something dangerous, but seeing the man standing before him, calm and composed, sent an unsettling feeling deep into his bones. "I should have known it was you," Tom said, trying to steady his voice. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his body tense. "Why are you here? What do you want with my family?" Robert smiled, a thin, calculating grin that sent a shiver down Tom's spine. "Not what you think, Tom, but I'm sure you figured out by now that things aren't exactly as they seem, are they?" Tom stared at him, fighting the urge to lunge at the man who had shattered everything he thought he knew about his life. But Robert wasn't just an ex-lover. He wasn't just the man who had betrayed Tom's trust with Sylvia. No, Robert Carter was something more, something far more dangerous. "I don't know what game you're playing, Robert," Tom said, his voice low, "but I'm done being part of it. Stay away from my wife. Stay away from my family." Robert shook his head slowly, his eyes gleaming with something far darker than Tom had expected. "It's already too late for that, Tom. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Tom took a step forward, narrowing his eyes. "Then tell me what the hell is going on?" The smug smile never left Robert's face. I'm not here to destroy your family. Not exactly. I'm here to make you understand something. Something Sylvia hasn't been able to tell you. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as the words hung between them like a threat. What could Robert possibly know that would change everything? Robert paused, allowing the tension to hang in the air. The lake behind them reflected the pale light from the street lamps, its still surface eerily quiet. You're right about one thing, Robert continued. I came back because I had unfinished business, but I'm not the one who needs to answer for the choices made here. You're looking for a villain in all the wrong places? The truth isn't going to be easy for you to hear. Tom's stomach tightened as Robert's words lingered. What truth? Robert took a slow step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Sylvia's not the only one with secrets, Tom. She's not the only one hiding the truth from you. Tom felt a wave of dizziness hit him. What are you talking about? You need to understand, Tom, Robert said, his eyes darkening, that everything that's happening right now, this pregnancy, this chaos, it's all part of something much bigger. You think it's just about me and Sylvia? This is about power and control. Tom's mind spun, struggling to comprehend what Robert was saying. His grip on the situation was slipping, and he could feel his reality cracking under the weight of Robert's words. Robert continued, his voice now laced with venom. The company I work for, Westwood Enterprises, we're involved in some sensitive operations, high-level stuff. And Sylvia? She's not just some naive woman who made a mistake. She's a key part of all this. Tom's heart raced as the words began to sink in. What do you mean? Sylvia's involved in your criminal activities? Robert's smirk deepened. I wouldn't call it criminal, Tom. I'd call it a strategic partnership. Sylvia has been working for us in her own way. Her role was simple. She was supposed to maintain the illusion. The affair? That was just a cover, a distraction. The twins? A part of the plan. Tom felt as though the ground had been ripped out from beneath him. What are you talking about? He demanded, struggling to keep his voice steady. What is all of this? What does Sylvia have to do with your organization? Robert's eyes gleamed with an almost predatory satisfaction. Sylvia's pregnancy, those twins, are part of a deal she made long before she ever met you. She was chosen to play a part in a much larger operation. And you were just a piece of the puzzle, a man she could manipulate, a man who could provide the perfect cover. But now you're becoming a problem. Tom's breath came in ragged gasps, his thoughts whirling. The twins, the affair, Sylvia's lies. It was all connected to this mysterious organization. So you're telling me that Sylvia's pregnancy, the twins, this was all orchestrated? And I'm just a pawn in some game I didn't know I was playing? Tom spat, fury rising in his chest. Robert nodded slowly, as though he were explaining something obvious. Exactly. Sylvia was never meant to fall for you, Tom. She wasn't supposed to fall in love. But you know how these things go. Feelings get involved. People like her, people like us. We don't get to choose who we love. But now it's too late. The twins are the key to everything. They're going to secure a future for us. A future you're no longer a part of. Tom felt his world disintegrating around him. His wife, the woman he had loved for over 2 decades, was involved in something that had the potential to destroy everything they had built. The twins, his children, were nothing more than pawns in a game far beyond his understanding. And if I don't cooperate, what happens then? Tom asked, his voice tight with anger. Robert took a step back, eyes dark with menace. Then your life becomes the collateral. If you don't stop interfering, if you don't stay out of this, you'll lose everything. And I'm not just talking about your family, I'm talking about your life. Tom felt the blood drain from his face. The danger was no longer abstract. It was real, immediate. Sylvia had been playing a game, and now the stakes had risen. Before Tom could respond, Robert turned to leave, but not without one final parting shot. I'll give you a choice, Tom, Robert said over his shoulder. Stay out of our way, and maybe you and your family get to live. Keep digging, and the consequences will be Irreversible. Tom stood frozen by the lake, the weight of Robert's words pressing down on him like a heavy stone. His family was in danger, and the path ahead was murky and fraught with threats. As Robert disappeared into the night, Tom made a silent vow to uncover the truth. No matter what it took, the next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty and dread. Tom's world had turned upside down. He couldn't shake the image of Robert's cold, calculating smile or the chilling words he had left behind. His mind raced with questions. How deep did this go? Was Sylvia truly involved in something criminal? And what did Robert mean by the twins being the key to everything? Tom had never felt so out of control, but he couldn't sit idly by. The stakes were too high. He had to protect his family, especially Sylvia, despite everything she had hidden from him. She may have betrayed him, but she was still his wife, the mother of his children. He couldn't lose her. And if the twins were truly a part of some larger plan, he needed to figure out what it all meant before it was too late. Determined to find the truth, Tom met with Officer Callahan again. This time they met at a small cafe, away from prying eyes. Tom could see the concern in her eyes, even though she tried to keep her expression neutral. She had been busy following leads on Robert and Westwood Enterprises, but they hadn't gotten far. The whole thing was like chasing a shadow. "Have you found anything new?" Tom asked, his voice urgent. "Anything that could help me understand what's really going on?" Callahan shook her head, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. "I've been digging into Westwood Enterprises. It's a front for a much larger operation, but the details are tight. I've reached out to a few contacts who specialize in organized crime, but no one's willing to talk. Whoever's behind this has power. Real power." Tom felt the weight of her words. Power. That was something he knew all too well now. "What about Robert? What have you learned about him?" Callahan hesitated, clearly weighing how much to say. "Robert Carter's not just some small-time crook. He's connected. We're talking serious people here. I've uncovered something about him, but it's not pretty. He's been tied to several high-profile cases of fraud and money laundering, but the one that stands out is his involvement with a company called Forsyth Holdings." Tom's heart skipped. He'd heard that name before. Forsyth Holdings was notorious for its ties to various criminal enterprises across the country. They had been linked to everything from illegal arms deals to the trafficking of rare art. "But what did that have to do with Sylvia?" Callahan continued. "Robert's name keeps coming up in connection with a set of files I haven't been able to access yet. But there's something else. A person connected to Forsyth has gone missing. A woman named Lydia Martin. She worked as an executive at Forsyth. Some say she was trying to break free from the company, but no one's seen or heard from her in weeks." Tom's mind spun. A missing woman, a powerful criminal syndicate, and his wife, all tangled together. It was too much to comprehend. "What's the connection?" Tom asked, his voice tight. "We think Lydia knew too much," Callahan said quietly, "and she was getting close to exposing it. Robert Carter is likely involved in her disappearance." Tom's stomach churned. Robert had something to do with a missing woman? Was Sylvia involved in that too? Was she in danger? "I need to talk to Sylvia," Tom said abruptly, standing up from the table. "I have to know what she's really involved in." Callahan grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Tom, wait. Don't do this alone. This is bigger than you think. Sylvia might be a part of it, but if she's in danger too, you need to let me handle this. I have connections. I can—" "No." Tom cut her off, his voice low and determined. "I can't just sit here and let this go. I've been passive for too long. Sylvia's my wife. If she's in trouble, I'm the one who has to help her." Callahan sighed, clearly frustrated but understanding. "Fine, but at least let me assist you. Let me guide you. This is not a game, Tom. If you walk into this blind, you'll end up in over your head." Tom nodded, though his resolve had already hardened. He wasn't going to let his wife, whether she deserved his loyalty or not, be left to fend for herself in a world so far beyond anything they had ever imagined. That night, Tom decided to confront Sylvia directly. He couldn't wait any longer. The lies, the betrayal, everything had to come to light. He needed to know if she had been involved in Robert's world, in Forsyth Holdings, in the dark web of crime he was slowly uncovering. When he got home, the house was silent. The twins were already asleep and Sylvia was in their bedroom, as usual. She looked up when he entered, her eyes wary but calm. She knew something was coming. "Sylvia," Tom said, his voice cold and firm, "we need to talk." She stood up slowly, a frown tugging at her lips. "What's going on, Tom? What's this about?" Tom's heart thudded in his chest, but he couldn't back down now. "I know about Robert. I know about the twins, and I know you've been lying to me. But most of all, I know there's more to this than just an affair." Sylvia's face paled, her hand instinctively going to her stomach, as if protecting the twins from the weight of his words. "Tom, please. I never wanted you to find out like this. Don't lie to me." Tom's voice rose, the anger and confusion threatening to overtake him. "I'm not asking for excuses anymore. I want the truth. Why is Robert here? What's this about a deal? What's this about Forsyth Holdings?" Sylvia recoiled as if he'd slapped her. "How do you know about that?" Her voice trembled with panic. "I have sources, Sylvia," Tom shot back. "I've been digging, and I've seen enough to know you've been involved in something much bigger than I ever imagined." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't try to deny it. "Tom, I didn't want this. It was never supposed to go this far. The twins, they're part of something much larger. Robert and we made a deal years ago, before I met you. It was meant to be simple. Have the babies, get out. But things changed. I didn't know how deep I was getting. I didn't know." Tom stared at her in disbelief. "A deal? For children?" Before he could speak, Sylvia collapsed onto the bed, her face buried in her hands. "I'm sorry, Tom. I didn't know what else to do. They have my family. They have us both." Suddenly, the weight of everything hit Tom like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about survival. And in the end, Robert's game was bigger than either of them. Now Tom had a choice to make, one that could cost him everything. The weight of Sylvia's confession hung in the air, suffocating Tom. His mind raced, but his body felt frozen, rooted to the spot. The woman he had loved for more than 20 years, his wife, the mother of his children, had just admitted to being part of something criminal, something far beyond any affair. He was no longer in control. He had always thought he was the protector, the strong one, the man who could fix things. But now he was staring at the abyss, and the question loomed over him like a dark cloud. What now? Sylvia sat on the edge of the bed, her body trembling, her face pale, her tears soaking into her hands. She had expected anger. She had expected betrayal. But the truth was so much darker than she could have ever imagined. The deal with Robert, with Forsyth Holdings, had been a chain that wrapped itself around her, pulling her deeper into a world of power and corruption she had never fully understood. Now, with Tom finding out, the chain was tightening. "Tom," she whispered, barely able to look him in the eyes. "Please. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you." Tom stood at the foot of the bed, his arms folded tightly across his chest, trying to keep the storm of emotions at bay. The pain of betrayal, the anger at her lies, and the fear for what lay ahead. The unknowns of the dangerous world she had been living in, all of it mixed together, pulling him in every direction. "Then why, Sylvia?" His voice was hoarse, the hurt raw and biting. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me enough to be honest with me? All these years, what were we? A lie? A cover for your deal with Robert and Forsyth?" Sylvia's head dropped into her hands as fresh tears came. She couldn't look at him. She couldn't face the reality of the damage she had caused. "I didn't want you to be part of this. I never wanted you to know. I thought I could protect you, protect us. But it all spiraled out of control. I thought I could leave it behind, but the twins, Tom, the twins are the reason they're still holding us hostage." Tom's mind reeled. The twins weren't just babies. They were the reason for everything. He felt sick. The children he thought would bring joy to their home, to their family, were now the very thing that had tied them to a criminal empire. How was he supposed to feel about them now? Who are they, Sylvia? Who's pulling the strings? Robert? Forsyth? Or is there someone even higher up in this thing? Sylvia shook her head. "I don't know, Tom. I only know the people Robert works for. They're powerful, they have connections. But they're not just about money. They have their hands in everything: politics, law enforcement, businesses. I don't know how they do it, but they control so much of what happens in the city. And Robert's their enforcer. He's the one who gets things done when they need someone to clean up a mess or make something disappear. Tom felt the ground slip beneath him, as though everything he thought he knew about his life was slipping through his fingers. The woman he had married, the life they had built, was all built on secrets, lies, and a hidden world he had never seen. And now, the very people who had orchestrated this chaos were coming after them. "If they can't get what they want from us," Sylvia whispered, her voice trembling, "they'll kill us, Tom. They'll kill me. They'll kill the twins." Tom's mind raced. He could see the picture forming, each piece fitting together in a terrifying way. Sylvia had been caught in the web of an unthinkable conspiracy, and now she was in deeper than she could get out. The twins were their bargaining chip, and Tom, by association, had become a target as well. He couldn't let her down. He couldn't let his children, the unborn twins, become pawns in this game any longer. But how could he protect them? How could he take down an entire criminal network without falling into their trap? He paced the room, trying to think, to plan. The walls were closing in, but one thing was clear: they had to act fast. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, cutting through the silence of the room like a knife. Tom froze. Sylvia's eyes widened, panic flooding her face. She quickly wiped her tears away, trying to regain some composure. "Who's that?" Tom asked, his voice tight, his instincts screaming. "I don't know," Sylvia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't tell anyone else what was happening. It could be Robert. It could be them." Tom's heart pounded in his chest. He rushed to the door, glancing back at Sylvia one last time before he opened it. He knew that whatever was on the other side, it would change everything. When he opened the door, a man in a dark suit stood there. His face was unrecognizable, his features cold and emotionless. He wasn't someone Tom knew, but there was no mistaking the aura of danger that surrounded him. "I'm looking for Sylvia Davis," the man said, his voice low and steady. Tom's blood ran cold. He knew this wasn't a friendly visit. "I'm her husband," Tom said, stepping in front of the door. "What do you want with her?" The man didn't flinch. "I'm here on behalf of Forsyth Holdings. Your wife is in violation of our agreement, and we've been instructed to collect. The twins are required." Tom's mind raced, but he stayed calm. He had only one option now. This wasn't just about Sylvia anymore. It was about them, his family, and he would do whatever it took to protect them. "What if I don't hand her over?" Tom asked, his voice sharp. The man's expression remained unchanged. "Then you're making a very dangerous choice, Mr. Davis." Tom's grip tightened on the door handle. He had no time left, no time to second guess. If he wanted to protect his family, he would have to take matters into his own hands. He glanced back at Sylvia, who was standing behind him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I'm not letting you take her," Tom said firmly, looking back at the stranger. "Not now. Not ever." The man's face twisted slightly, and for a moment, Tom thought he saw something like a smile flicker at the corners of his mouth. Then, the man's voice dropped, the threat hanging heavy in the air. "You've made your choice. Now live with the consequences." Tom slammed the door shut, heart pounding. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure. This fight wasn't over. He wasn't going to let anyone tear his family apart, not without a fight.